The air conditioning in the bus station hummed monotonously, blending with the echo of distant voices and the rumble of suitcases on the cold marble floor. It was a typical Tuesday in September, when afternoons still carry the weight of a departing winter and people hurried between appointments and uncertain destinations. At the city's bus terminal, the routine followed its predictable course. Employees yawning behind counters, passengers checking their phones, children crying in the arms of tired mothers. Then he appeared. The man walked slowly, each step measured with the precision of someone who had learned to gauge distances not only by space, but by pain. His gray hair was meticulously combed, despite the worn beret he held in his trembling hands. His light blue dress shirt, though faded with time, was impeccably ironed, and his tailored trousers, even though patched in almost imperceptible places, maintained a perfect crease. His leather shoes, polished to a shine, contrasted with the wooden cane he carried, not as a crutch of age, but as a staff of dignity. Joseph Miller, 78 years old, a veteran of peacekeeping missions known to few and understood by even fewer, approached the bus company counter with the same upright posture he had maintained since his days in uniform. His brown eyes, etched with wrinkles that told tales of scorching sun and sleepless nights, met those of the attendant behind the glass. "Good morning, son," he said, gently placing his wallet on the counter. "I'd like to purchase a ticket to the Capitol, please." On the other side of the counter, Robert, a middle-aged man whose face bore the wariness of someone working double shifts, raised his eyes from the computer screen with obvious irritation. The day had started badly, an argument at home, impossible traffic, a supervisor demanding increasingly unattainable targets. And now this old man appearing with his excessive politeness, as if he were doing the world a favor. "What time?" Robert asked without fully raising his head, his fingers tapping impatiently on the keyboard. "If possible, the 2 o'clock," Joseph replied, carefully opening his wallet to retrieve the counted cash. "I need to arrive before 6 for a doctor's appointment." Robert sighed loudly, theatrically, as if carrying the weight of the world's incompetence on his shoulders. "That time is almost full. There's only a seat at the back, near the restroom. Can you handle the smell?" The question was dripping with sarcasm, but Joseph simply nodded. "No problem, son. Any seat is fine." Son," muttered Robert, typing with unnecessary force. "ID." Joseph presented his identification card, and Robert snatched it, slapping it against the counter as he checked the details. Joseph Miller, wow, what an old-fashioned name. Born in 1946. Jesus, you're older than my dad. The words came like barbs, but Joseph remained motionless, his eyes fixed on a distant point, as if he were seeing something others couldn't. Perhaps it was a technique learned on battlefields, where patience was a matter of survival. Perhaps it was simply the wisdom of someone who had learned that some battles aren't worth fighting. "That'll be $60, said Robert, returning the document carelessly. Joseph began counting the bills carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged each bill on the counter. They were $10 and $20 bills, some quite worn, others newer, all counted and recounted with the meticulousness of someone who cannot afford to be wrong. Robert rolled his eyes. "This isn't going to take all day, is it, Mr. Miller? There's a line behind you." Indeed, a small line had formed behind the veteran. 3 people were waiting. A young woman in a hospital uniform who constantly checked her watch, a businessman in a suit who spoke loudly on the phone about business, and an elderly couple who whispered to each other, watching the scene with growing discomfort. "I'll count along," Joseph said softly, slightly speeding up the process. 10, 20, 30. "Oh my God," Robert interrupted, tapping his pen on the desk. "Have you never seen money before? How slow can you be?" The nurse behind him shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly embarrassed. The businessman paused his phone call for a moment, frowning. The elderly couple exchanged incredulous glances. Joseph continued counting, but his hands began to tremble more visibly. 70, 80, 90. "This isn't working, old man," Robert exploded, standing up from his chair. "Either you learn to count money or go home. You're disrupting service." Then something shifted in the air of the bus station. As if an audible frequency had been altered, as if the environment itself had gained a different tension. The businessman put his phone in his pocket, the nurse stepped forward, and the elderly couple suddenly approached. Joseph, however, merely took a deep breath and continued. 100, 110, 120. "What a farce," muttered Robert, now loud enough for other passengers to hear. "Where's this man's family? He shouldn't be alone on the street. No, he could get lost. He could forget where he lives." The words echoed through the departure area like a collective slap. Some people stopped walking, turning to observe the scene. Security guards noticed the commotion, but remained at a distance, unsure how to intervene. Joseph finished counting the money, exactly $60, and carefully arranged it on the counter. His hands were no longer trembling. His eyes, which had remained downcast, slowly rose to meet Robert's. "It's all correct, son," he said, with a calmness that contrasts brutally with the attendant's aggressiveness. Robert grabbed the bills with a brusque gesture, quickly checked them, and started typing the ticket information. "Seat 47, back of the bus, boarding at 1:40, gate B, and don't be late." That's when the nurse stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Robert. "I'd like to switch seats with Mr. Miller. My seat is 12, up front. Would it be possible to make the exchange?" Robert looked at her with irritation. "Why on earth would you want to do that?" "Because I would like to," she replied, simply, with a firmness that broke no argument. Before Robert could protest, the businessman also approached. "I'd also like to contribute. May I pay the difference so that he can travel in first class?" The elderly couple stepped forward. "We have first-class seats as well," said the woman. "If you'll accept, we'd be honored to give them up." Robert looked around, confused by the sudden mobilization. What's going on here? The old man doesn't need charity. He paid for his ticket. "It's not charity," said the nurse, her voice beginning to attract the attention of other passengers. "It's respect." Joseph raised his hand gently. "I appreciate everyone's kindness, but seat 47 is perfect for me." He walked away from the counter with the same dignity he had arrived with, holding his ticket and walking towards the waiting area. But something had changed in the atmosphere. People followed him with their eyes, not with pity or embarrassment, but with a respectful curiosity. Robert, realizing he had become the center of disapproving stares, tried to resume his aggressive posture. "Next!" he shouted, banging his pen on the desk. But nobody approached the counter. The nurse remained where she was, arms crossed, staring at Robert with an expression that spoke volumes. The businessman put away his phone and also remained there, motionless. The elderly couple didn't move. "I said next," Robert repeated, now with less conviction. "There is no next," a calm voice said from behind him. Robert turned and saw his supervisor, a 50-year-old man named Carlos, who had been observing the scene for a few minutes. Carlos had served in the army 2 decades ago, before working in bus transportation, and had recognized something in Joseph's bearing that intrigued him. "Robert," said Carlos, approaching the counter, "I need to talk to you." "Boss, I was just doing my job." "Your job," Carlos interrupted, "is to serve customers with respect and professionalism, not to humiliate elderly people." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made the entire bus station stop. The rhythmic echo of boots marching in perfect synchronization. Through the main entrance, a group of 8 Marines in dress uniform advanced in impeccable formation. Their boots hit the ground with the precision of a metronome, and their navy blue uniforms shined under the fluorescent lights. Ahead, a sergeant with decades of service carried a small wooden box. The passengers naturally moved aside, making way for the formation. Conversation ceased, cell phones were put away, children stopped crying. It was as if a piece of history had entered the bus station and demanded respectful silence. The sergeant signaled, and the formation stopped in front of where Joseph was sitting, reading a worn book. The veteran looked up, surprised, and slowly stood up. "Mr. Joseph Miller?" asked the sergeant. "Yes." "Sergeant Paul Henry, United States Marine Corps. On behalf of our Corps and the Marine Command, I am here to deliver a commendation that should have been given a long time ago." Joseph blinked several times, as if trying to process what was happening. The sergeant opened the wooden box, revealing a gleaming military medal. "For services rendered to the country in peacekeeping missions, for the courage shown in foreign territory, and for dedication to duty even in the face of imminent danger, the United States Marine Corps awards you the Medal of Valor." Absolute silence filled the bus station. The sergeant continued, "Mr. Miller, for 3 years you served in conflict zones, protecting civilians and maintaining peace where others couldn't tread. You saved 17 documented lives, including 5 children. Your superiors lost contact after your transfer, but they never forgot your service." Joseph was motionless, his eyes welling up. "This commendation should have been made 40 years ago," said the sergeant, removing the medal from the box. "But it's never too late to recognize a hero." He pinned the medal to Joseph's chest, who remained in absolute silence. Then the sergeant stepped back and gave a perfect salute. The other 7 Marines did the same, in absolute synchronization. The salute lasted 30 seconds that seemed like an eternity. Joseph, with tears streaming down his face, raised his trembling hand and returned the salute. It wasn't the salute of a frail old man, but that of a soldier who had never forgotten how to behave in the face of honor. That's when something extraordinary happened. The nurse began to clap. Slowly, respectfully, but with a firmness that echoed throughout the entire bus station. The businessman joined her, the elderly couple too. In a few seconds, the entire bus station was applauding. But it wasn't an ordinary round of applause. It was a reverent, almost religious applause, as if people understood that they were witnessing something greater than themselves. Robert, behind the counter, was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he watched the scene. Carlos, his supervisor, approached him. "Robert," Carlos said softly, "you just humiliated a war hero." The words weighed in the air like lead. The sergeant approached Joseph again. "Mr. Miller, it would be an honor to escort you to your destination. We have an official vehicle waiting outside." Joseph shook his head gently. "I appreciate it immensely, Sergeant, but I already have my ticket. I don't want privileges that others don't have." The sergeant smiled. "With all due respect, sir, it's not a privilege. It's justice." But Joseph was adamant. "I'll take the bus, as planned, but I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this honor. You can't imagine what it means to me." The sergeant nodded respectfully. "Then we bid you farewell, sir, but know that you will never be forgotten again." He gave another signal, and the formation reorganized. The 8 Marines marched toward the exit with the same precision with which they had arrived, leaving behind a profound and respectful silence. Joseph sat down again, but now the people around him looked at him differently. Not with pity or embarrassment, but with genuine admiration. Some discreetly approached to greet him, others simply waved from afar. A nurse approached and sat beside him.
"May I ask a question?" "Of course, son." "How do you manage to maintain so much dignity in the face of people like that attendant?" Joseph smiled for the first time since arriving at the bus station. "You know, young lady, I learned something during the war. We can't control how others treat us, but we can always control how we react. Dignity doesn't come from the outside in, it comes from the inside out." "But doesn't it hurt?" "Of course it hurts," he admitted, "but the pain passes. Dignity remains." At this time, dear friends who are joining our journey through these heartwarming stories, I would like to make a special request. If this narrative has moved you, if it has made you reflect on the importance of respect and human dignity, please subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. You help us bring these messages of hope and humanity to even more people who need to hear that. Your subscription is more than a click. It's a vote of confidence in stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. On the other side of the bus station, Robert faced his supervisor.
Carlos had pulled the employee aside for a private conversation, but the tone of his voice made it clear that the situation was serious. "Robert, in 20 years of working here, I've never seen a situation like this," Carlos said. "You humiliated a war veteran, a man who risked his life for the country." "I didn't know," Robert mumbled, but his excuse sounded hollow even to himself. "Didn't know what?" Carlos asked. "That he was a veteran, or that he was a human being who deserved respect?" Robert didn't answer. "The company has clear policies on customer treatment," Carlos continued, "but this goes beyond policies. This is about character." Meanwhile, near Gate B, Joseph was talking to other passengers who had approached. A young student asked about his military experiences, and he answered humbly, always diverting the focus from his own accomplishments to the lessons learned. "War doesn't make heroes," he said. "It reveals who was already a hero inside." An elderly lady who had observed the entire scene from the beginning held Joseph's hand as she spoke. "My husband was also a soldier. He died 10 years ago. He would say that you are an example of what it means to serve." Joseph squeezed her hand affectionately. "I'm sure your husband was an honorable man." When the time for boarding finally arrived, something unexpected happened. The bus driver, a robust 50-year-old man named Jose, got off the vehicle and approached Joseph. "Mr. Miller?" he asked respectfully. "Yes?" "Jose Silva, bus driver on this line for 15 years. I would like to invite you to sit in the seat next to mine, in the front. It's the most comfortable seat on the bus." Joseph was about to protest, but Jose continued. "My son serves in the Marines, sir. He's on an international mission now. It would be an honor for me." This time, Joseph accepted. During the trip, Jose talked about his son, about the challenges of being the father of a soldier, about the pride and fear that walked together. Joseph listened attentively, offering words of comfort and wisdom. "Your son is making a difference in the world," Joseph said, "and that's something he will carry forever." The trip passed quickly. Other passengers approached to talk, listen to stories, ask questions. The bus transformed into a kind of mobile living room, where people who would normally travel in silence found genuine human connections. When they arrived at the capital, Jose helped Joseph get off, carried his small suitcase, and walked him to the exit of the terminal. "Mr. Miller," Jose said, "it was a privilege to meet you." "The privilege was mine, Jose. Take care and give your son a hug when he returns." Joseph walked away slowly, his cane tapping the ground with a soft, steady rhythm. The medal on his chest shone discreetly in the late afternoon light. He didn't know it, but the story of his dignity in the face of humiliation was already spreading. The nurse had posted on social media about what she had witnessed. The businessman had told coworkers. The elderly couple had called their children and grandchildren. Robert, back at the bus station, had requested a transfer to another department. He could no longer work in customer service without remembering Joseph's serene gaze in the face of his rudeness. Carlos had accepted the request, but not without a frank conversation about responsibility and humanity. "You know, Robert," Carlos had said, "we all have bad days. We all sometimes take our frustrations out on innocent people. But what defines our character is what we do after we realize the mistake." Robert had nodded silently. In the capital, Joseph arrived at the military hospital where he received medical care. The doctors noticed the medal on his chest and asked about it. He told the story with the same humility as always, minimizing its importance and emphasizing the kindness of the Marines. "Doctor," he said to the doctor who had been treating him for years, "today I learned that it's never too late for justice to appear." The doctor, a retired colonel, examined the medal with interest. "Mr. Miller, this is one of the highest decorations a soldier can receive in peacetime. You should be proud." "I am," admitted Joseph, "but not for the medal itself. I'm proud because it represents something bigger, the reminder that small acts of courage can make a difference." That night, in his small apartment, Joseph placed the medal on his dresser next to a photo of his late wife. She had died 5 years earlier, never knowing about his military decorations. He had always thought his war stories were too heavy for her. "Look, Mary," he murmured to the photo, "it seems someone still remembers." He sat in his armchair where he used to read and picked up a sheet of paper. With careful handwriting, he began to write a letter he would never send, but that needed to be written. "Dear Robert," he wrote, "today you taught me a valuable lesson. You reminded me that dignity doesn't come from how others treat us, but from how we choose to behave. You gave me the opportunity to show that it's possible to maintain composure even in the face of injustice. For that, I forgive you. And more than that, I thank you." He folded the letter and put it in his drawer, along with other unsent letters, to dead war buddies, to his wife who was no longer there, to the country he had served silently. At the bus station, a new employee had taken over Robert's position. His name was Michael, a 25-year-old son of immigrants who treated each customer as if they were a member of his family. Carlos had instructed him on the company's values, but mostly on the human values that should guide any work. "Michael," Carlos had said, "always remember, every person who comes to your counter has a story. Some are sad, others are inspiring, but all deserve respect." Months later, Joseph's story still echoed through the hallways of the bus station. New employees heard about the veteran who had faced humiliation with dignity, about the Marines who showed up to do justice, about how a moment of inhumanity had turned into a lesson of love for one's neighbor. The nurse, whose name was Sandra, made sure to tell the story to each coworker. At the hospital where she worked, she became known for her extra kindness to elderly patients. The businessman, Mark, changed the way he treated service company employees. He started greeting them by name, asking about their lives, reminding them that behind every uniform there was a human being with dreams and difficulties. The elderly couple, Anthony and Lucy, created a small organization to help forgotten veterans. They knew that there were other Josephs across the country, men and women who had served silently and are now aging in anonymity. Jose, the driver, wrote a letter to his son about Joseph. The young Marine, somewhere in the ocean, read the letter and cried. He understood that he was following in the footsteps of men like Joseph, who had paved the way with dignity and sacrifice. And Robert? Robert took months to fully process what had happened. He had been transferred to the stockroom, where he worked alone organizing inventory. At first, he felt like a victim of circumstance. But over time, he began to understand that that day at the bus station had been a cruel mirror reflecting who he really was. He decided to go to therapy. He discovered that his aggressiveness stemmed from accumulated frustrations, unrealized dreams, a rage that he took out on innocent people. He learned to cope with his emotions, to find healthy ways to express his feelings. A year later, Robert asked to return to customer service. Carlos hesitated, but decided to give him a second chance. Robert, Carlos said, everyone deserves a second chance. But remember, some wounds never heal completely. Mr. Miller may have forgiven you, but that doesn't erase what happened. Robert nodded. He knew he would always carry the memory of that day. On his first day back at the counter, an elderly man approached wanting to buy a ticket. Robert felt his heart pound, but he took a deep breath and smiled. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" The elderly man smiled back. "Good morning, son. How kind of you." It was a small but significant moment. Robert had learned that redemption doesn't come in grand gestures, but in small daily choices to be better. Joseph never knew the impact his dignity had caused. He continued his simple routine: doctor's appointments, walks in the park, reading at the city library. The medal remained on his dresser, next to Mary's photo, as a silent reminder that some acknowledgments arrive when we least expect them. But he felt a subtle difference in the world around him. People seemed kinder, more willing to help, more aware of the humanity that exists in every casual encounter. He didn't know that he had been the catalyst for this change, that his serene reaction to injustice had planted seeds of kindness in hearts he didn't even know. Sometimes, walking down the street, Joseph would meet people who greeted him with extra respect, with warmer smiles. He would reciprocate with his characteristic kindness, unaware that these were people who had heard his story, who had been touched by the narrative of a man who chose dignity when he could have chosen revolt. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench where he used to feed pigeons, Joseph was approached by a young journalist. "Mr. Miller," the young man said respectfully, "my name is Lucas. I'm a reporter for the local newspaper. I'd like to do a story about your story." Joseph smiled gently. "What story, son?" "The story of what happened at the bus station, the story of your dignity." Joseph thought for a moment. "I don't think my story is special enough for a newspaper." "With all due respect, Mr. Miller, I think you're wrong." Joseph agreed to the interview, but on one condition: that the story wouldn't be about him, but about the importance of respect between people. The interview was published a week later. It wasn't sensationalist or dramatic. It was simply the story of an ordinary man who had made extraordinary choices. The headline read, "Dignity as a Form of Resistance." The impact was immediate. Readers sent letters to the newspaper, sharing their own stories of humiliation and dignity. Teachers used the article in civics classes. Companies included the story in customer service training. Joseph became, unintentionally, a symbol. But he didn't let the attention get to him. He continued his simple life, always remembering that real heroes don't wear capes, don't appear in newspapers, don't seek recognition. They simply do what's right because it's right to do. On his daily walks, Joseph carried a quiet certainty that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. That dignity isn't a luxury for the strong, but a necessity for those who want to keep the flame of humanity alive. And so, as the sun set another day over the city, Joseph walked slowly home, his cane tapping gently on the ground, his medal shining discreetly under his shirt, and his heart warmed by the certainty that he had fulfilled another day his silent commitment to dignity. That night, before going to sleep, he looked once more at Mary's photograph and murmured, "It was a good day, my love. People still know how to recognize what's right." On the other side of the city, at the bus station, now closing its doors, the echo of his boots still seemed to resonate through the empty corridors. Carlos, making his last round as supervisor, stopped in front of the ticket booth where it all had begun. He thought of Joseph, of Robert, of all the lessons a single moment can teach. At the hospital where Sandra worked, she finished her night shift, caring for an elderly patient with the same tenderness she had learned from witnessing Joseph's dignity. At home, Mark had dinner with his family, genuinely asking about each one's day, remembering that small gestures make a difference. Jose drove through the early morning on a new route, carrying passengers who slept peacefully, knowing that there was a careful driver behind the wheel.
Robert, at home, read a book on emotional intelligence, part of his journey of self-knowledge and transformation. Anthony and Lucy planned their next visit to a veterans nursing home, bringing not only donations, but mostly companionship and recognition. And somewhere in the ocean, Joseph's son looked at the stars and thought of the veteran his father had written about, carrying in his chest the pride of following a tradition of honorable men. All these lives, touched by a single moment of dignity in the face of adversity, continued to radiate kindness like waves spreading infinitely through the water. Because that's the truth about dignity. It doesn't get used up when exercised. It multiplies. It doesn't diminish when shared. It grows. It doesn't weaken when tested. It strengthens. Joseph Miller, war veteran, silent hero, involuntary master of the art of keeping humanity alive, had proven once again that the greatest victory is not in defeating the enemy, but in overcoming the temptation to become what we despise. And when the city finally fell asleep, it carried with it the memory that there are still people able to teach us, by example, that true strength doesn't shout. It whispers with the serenity of someone who knows that dignity is the last bastion of the human soul, that which no one can take from us unless we voluntarily surrender it. The medal on Joseph's dresser shone softly in the darkness, not only as a symbol of military recognition, but as an eternal reminder that small acts of moral greatness can illuminate the whole world, one soul at a time.